Have you ever been judged by the cover of a book you haven't even opened? Have you felt the sting of laughter from those who have no idea about the wars you have fought within yourself, the mountains you have climbed just to stand at the same starting line as them? This is a story about a woman who was seen as a mistake, a crack in the system, a failure waiting to happen. It is a story about what happens when the one thing everyone believes is your greatest weakness becomes the source of a power so profound, it shatters their entire understanding of strength. Her name was Alara, and she arrived at the gates of the National Search and Rescue Special Operations Training Facility like a whisper in a thunderstorm. The other candidates were monoliths of muscle and granite, their jaws set, their histories written in the confident swagger of their walk. They were men carved from the very rock they were about to be tested against. Alara, by contrast, was of a slighter build, her frame wiry rather than bulky, her quiet demeanor a stark contrast to the boisterous energy crackling in the cold morning air. Her presence felt like a clerical error. As they stood in formation on the gravel parade ground, the man who would become her shadow, Sergeant Rex, paced before them. He was a mountain in human form, with a voice like grinding stone, and eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. His gaze swept over the recruits, nodding with approval at the broad shoulders and thick necks, until his eyes landed on Alara. They stopped. A flicker of something between disbelief and contempt crossed his face. He walked directly to her, circling her as a predator would circle uncertain prey. "Well, well," he boomed, the sound echoing off the barracks. "Look what we have here. Did you take a wrong turn on your way to the library, little bird?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through the ranks. Alara's eyes remained fixed forward, her expression unreadable, her posture ramrod straight. She didn't flinch. This only seemed to irritate Rex more. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl meant for all to hear. "This place chews up and spits out men twice your size. This isn't about feelings or trying your best. This is about breaking points. And I promise you, I will find yours." He turned away, addressing the group, but his message was aimed at her. "Look around you. You are here to become the shield for the helpless. To run into the fire everyone else is running from. Weakness here doesn't just get you killed, it gets your team killed. There is no room for it. It will be carved out of you, one way or another." From that moment, a silent chasm opened. Alara was on one side, and the rest of the world was on the other. The men, taking their cue from Rex, kept their distance. Her bunk was an island in a sea of camaraderie. They saw what Rex saw, a diversity initiative, a lowered standard, a liability. They didn't see the memory that fueled her, the image of a younger sister lost to a flash flood, a memory of her own small hands being too weak to hold on. They didn't see the years of relentless, solitary training, of pushing her body past every conceivable limit not to build bulk but to forge an unbreakable will. They saw a small woman. They had no idea they were standing next to a crucible. The first official test was exactly what Alara had dreaded, and exactly what Sergeant Rex had designed with her in mind. He called it the Breaker. It was a 30-foot wall of sheer, unforgiving concrete, studded with notoriously difficult handholds, to be scaled in full gear. It wasn't a test of technique or agility, it was a test of raw, explosive, upper-body strength. It was a filter, designed to catch and discard anyone who didn't fit Rex's specific mold of a rescuer. The men went first, their powerful frames moving up the wall with grunts and straining muscles, but most made it, hauling their weight over the top with a final, guttural roar. Then, it was Alara's turn. She strapped on the heavy pack, its weight settling onto her shoulders like a physical manifestation of all the doubt surrounding her. As she approached the wall, a hush fell over the other recruits. It wasn't a respectful silence, it was the silence of a crowd waiting for the inevitable crash. Rex stood beside the wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Show us what you've got, little bird," he drawled. Alara took a deep breath, blocking out the world, focusing only on the cold stone in front of her. She began to climb. Her movements were different from the men's. They were fluid, calculated, a dance of leverage and momentum. She found a rhythm, her smaller hands finding purchase where their larger ones had fumbled. She was halfway up, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming in protest, when her grip began to fail. The pack felt like it was trying to peel her off the wall. She reached for the next hold, her fingers brushing against the edge, but they couldn't find purchase. For a heart-stopping moment, she dangled by one arm, her body trembling with the strain. And then, her strength gave out. She fell. The safety rope caught her with a jarring thud a few feet from the ground. As she hung there, suspended in failure, the sound she had been bracing for finally came. It started as a snicker, then grew into open laughter. It wasn't just the recruits, it was Rex, his head thrown back in a triumphant, booming laugh that cut deeper than any insult. He unclipped her himself, his touch rough and dismissive. "I told you," he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed the group. "This is a place for warriors, not wishful thinkers. Pack your bags, recruit." The experiment is over. He turned his back on her, a gesture of finality. Humiliation washed over Alara, hot and suffocating. But beneath it, something else stirred. Not despair. It was rage. A cold, quiet, diamond-hard fury. She didn't move. She just stood there, her fists clenched, her gaze boring into his back. She had not come this far to be broken by a wall of concrete, and a man made of prejudice. From a window in the command building overlooking the training yard, Commander Thorne watched the scene unfold through a pair of binoculars. He was a man whose face was a roadmap of past missions, his eyes carrying the weight of the lives he'd saved and the few he hadn't. He had seen hundreds of recruits pass through these gates, had seen bravado crumble and quiet confidence prevail. He was tired of the noise, of the chest thumping and the obsession with brute force that his lead instructor, Sergeant Rex, championed. He believed in it to a point, but he knew it was only one part of a much larger equation. He had watched Alara's attempt on the wall not with the cynical certainty of Rex, but with a clinical, detached curiosity. He saw her technique, the intelligence in her movements. He saw her fight, her refusal to simply let go. And when she fell, he didn't see weakness. He saw the absolute limit of a human body being reached, and he saw the spirit within that body refuse to accept it. He saw her standing on the gravel, not crying, not slumping in defeat, but radiating a silent, defiant energy that he could feel even from 100 yards away. Thorne had been considering retirement. The program felt stagnant, producing the same type of rescuer over and over, strong and capable, but lacking a certain kind of fire he remembered from the old days. He was looking for something new, a different kind of strength. He lowered his binoculars and watched as Rex dismissed her with a wave of his hand. He saw the laughter of the other men. And he made a decision. He strode out of his office, his boots crunching on the gravel with an authority that silenced the yard. The laughter died in the recruits' throats. Sergeant Rex turned, his smirk fading as he saw the commander's thunderous expression. "Sir," Rex began, "as you can see, the recruit is not viable for this program. She's a liability." Thorne didn't even look at Rex. His eyes were fixed on Alara. He walked past his sergeant and stood before her, studying the unabashed fire in her eyes. There was no fear, no pleading. Only resolve. "What's your name, recruit?" he asked, his voice calm but resonant. "Alara, sir." "Why are you here, Alara?" She didn't hesitate. "Because people get lost in the dark, sir. And I'm good at finding my way." Her answer was simple, direct, and utterly devoid of the bravado he was used to. It was a statement of purpose. Thorne nodded slowly. He turned to Rex, his voice dropping an octave, leaving no room for argument. "She failed the drill, Sergeant. She did not fail the test. The test is whether or not you get back up. She's still standing." She continues. A wave of disbelief washed over the yard. Rex's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "Sir, with all due respect, that's against protocol." "She didn't meet the mandatory physical standard." "Then maybe the standard is wrong," Thorne retorted, his gaze sweeping over the other recruits. "Maybe we've been measuring the wrong thing. She gets until tomorrow's exercise. If she fails that, she's out." Is that clear? Rex's face was a mask of fury, but he knew a direct order when he heard one. Crystal, sir, he bit out. Thorn gave Elara one last, long look. Don't prove him right, recruit, he said softly, then turned and walked back to his office, the silence he left behind heavier than any sound. Elara knew she had been given not a lifeline, but a slightly longer fall. The next day's exercise was designed to be even more brutal. It was a 20-mile endurance and obstacle course through the jagged, unforgiving terrain of the surrounding mountains. Nicknamed the Serpent's Tooth, it was Rex's masterpiece of pain. As the sun rose, casting long, menacing shadows across the landscape, Elara stood at the starting line, a single thought consuming her: there is no failure today. She would finish this course, or she would leave a piece of herself on it. The horn blared, and they were off. The first few miles were a chaotic blur of running, climbing, and crawling through mud pits and under barbed wire. Elara kept a steady pace, conserving her energy, her mind focused, her body a coiled spring of desperate potential. The men, eager to prove their superiority, charged ahead, their powerful strides eating up the ground. Rex watched from various checkpoints, his expression sour every time he saw her still moving, still in the race. The defining feature of the Serpent's Tooth was a treacherous, near-vertical descent down a shale-covered slope known as the Slide. It was less a path and more a controlled fall. Recruits were meant to use a safety rope, but the fastest way was to half-slide, half-scramble down the loose rock. Driven by a reckless need to gain time, to prove she belonged, Elara chose the faster way. She was agile, her lighter frame an advantage here. She moved with a quick, sure-footed grace, leaping from one semi-stable rock to another. But desperation makes you careless. Halfway down, the rock beneath her foot shifted. It wasn't a dramatic slide, just a small, fatal wobble. Her ankle twisted at an unnatural angle, and a sound like a dry branch snapping echoed in her ears, sharp and sickeningly loud. A bolt of white-hot, blinding pain shot up her leg, from her ankle to her hip. Her vision swam. She collapsed onto the shale, the jagged rocks tearing at her uniform and her skin. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. There was only the pain, an all-consuming fire that threatened to swallow her whole. She looked down. Her leg was already beginning to swell. This was it. The end. Rex would be proven right. The commander's faith would be wasted. The memory of her sister's face flashed in her mind. Helpless. She had been helpless then. She would not be helpless now. Gritting her teeth so hard her jaw ached, she pushed the pain into a small, locked box in the back of her mind. Adrenaline, a savage and beautiful chemical, flooded her system, temporarily dulling the agony to a ferocious, throbbing ache. She got to her feet, testing the leg. A wave of nausea washed over her as the fractured bones grated against each other. It was broken. She knew it instantly. But she also knew that to stop, to even limp noticeably, was to quit. She took a step. Then another. The fire in her leg screamed, but the fire in her soul roared louder. She would not stop. She would finish. The pain became her fuel. The fracture in her leg forced a fundamental shift in how Elara approached the rest of the course. Brute force was no longer an option, survival depended on intelligence. She could no longer run, so she developed a rhythmic, ground-eating shuffle that minimized the impact on her injured leg, a grotesque but effective gait. When the other recruits used their powerful arms to haul themselves over high walls, Elara took an extra 30 seconds to analyze the structure, finding leverage points, and using the physics of the obstacle to her advantage, letting the wall do the work. Her mind, sharpened by the blade of constant agony, became her primary weapon. She saw the course not as a series of physical challenges, but as a series of puzzles to be solved with the least amount of force possible. The other recruits, running on reserves of muscle and pride, began to slow as the miles wore on. They saw her strange, limping pace and her sweat-soaked, pale face, and they mistook it for the exhaustion they were all feeling. They had no frame of reference for the war she was waging inside her own body. Sergeant Rex, monitoring the course from a jeep, grew increasingly frustrated. He saw her falling behind, but she never stopped. She was like a persistent ghost he couldn't shake. Every time he thought she would finally collapse, she would reappear over the next rise, a small, indomitable figure moving through the punishing landscape. "What's her status?" he barked into his radio, pulling up to a checkpoint. "Still moving, Sergeant," came the reply. "Pace is slow, but she's steady." Rex watched her through his own binoculars. He saw her face, contorted in what he assumed was the exertion of a body not built for this kind of punishment. He saw her favor one leg, and he smirked. She was braking. It was just taking longer than he'd expected. "Keep an eye on her," he ordered. "The second she stops for more than a minute, you pull her." "Understood." He drove off, confident that her collapse was imminent. He didn't see the silent tears of pain that mixed with the sweat on her face. He didn't see the way she bit her lip until it bled to keep from crying out. He saw what he wanted to see, a failure in slow motion. But Alara was no longer thinking about Rex, or the other recruits, or even Commander Thorne. Her world had shrunk to the next 3 feet in front of her. Take another step. Move past this tree. Get over that rock. The pain was a constant companion, a roaring in her ears that drowned out everything else. It had become a part of her, a rhythm to which she now moved. She learned to breathe with it, to anticipate its savage spikes with each misplaced step. She was no longer a person, she was a single, focused point of will, dragging a broken body toward a finish line that felt a universe away. The course was a living thing, and it was trying to devour her. The final 5 miles of the Serpent's Tooth were infamous. The obstacles were behind them, but what lay ahead was a cruel, psychological test known as the long haul. It was a straight, sun-baked dirt road leading back to the base, with no shade and a slight, demoralizing incline. It was pure endurance. It was here that the body's final reserves were spent, and the mind was left to carry the rest of the weight. Recruits, their bodies already screaming from the preceding 15 miles, began to falter. One by one, their bravado evaporated under the oppressive heat. A large, muscular recruit who had been near the front all day suddenly sat down on the side of the road, his head in his hands, utterly spent. A medic vehicle soon arrived to collect him. Another 2 dropped out a mile later, defeated by cramps and dehydration. For Alara, every step on the hard-packed earth sent a shockwave of agony up her fractured leg. The throbbing ache had become a constant, blinding nova of pain. She imagined the bone fragments grinding together, and her stomach churned. The locked box in her mind was beginning to break open. The pain was leaking out, coloring her vision, making the world shimmer and distort at the edges. She was falling further and further behind the main group. She could no longer see anyone ahead of her. She was alone with the sun, the road, and the fire in her leg. Her radio crackled to life. It was Rex's voice, smooth and laced with a triumphant poison. "How are we doing back there, little bird? The sun a bit too much for you?" Alara didn't have the breath or the will to answer. She just kept moving, her strange, lurching shuffle now more pronounced. "There's no shame in quitting," his voice cooed, a serpent in her ear. "We all knew this was too much for you. Just say the word. We'll come pick you up. You can go home. The word barely registered. This road was her home now. This pain was her home. Quitting was a foreign language she no longer understood. Her silence only seemed to fuel his taunts. "Listen to me. You're becoming a liability. If this were a real mission, you'd be endangering the whole team with your selfish pride. Stop." Now his words were meant to break her spirit, but they had the opposite effect. A real mission. Her sister. The flash flood. The feeling of being too small, too weak to make a difference. This wasn't pride. This was penance. This was a promise she had made to a ghost. She gripped the straps of her pack, her knuckles white, and forced herself to move faster, the pain exploding into a kaleidoscope of colors behind her eyes. She would not stop. She would crawl if she had to. She would finish. Back in the sterile, air-conditioned quiet of the command center, Commander Thorne watched the dots on the digital map. Most of the recruits were clustered together, nearing the finish line. A few dots had turned red, indicating they had dropped out. And then there was one blinking green dot, far behind the others, moving at a crawl. Elara. He frowned, leaning closer to the screen that displayed her biometrics. What he saw made his blood run cold. Her heart rate was a frantic, sustained rhythm, far too high for her current pace. It was the heart rate of someone in shock. Her core temperature was fluctuating wildly. Red flags were flashing all over her display, alerts that should have triggered an automatic medical evacuation. Yet, her dot kept moving. It was slow, agonizingly so, but it never stopped. It was impossible. The data was a contradiction. A body in that much distress should have shut down. Thorne toggled the comms. Sergeant Rex, what is Recruit Elara's visual status? Rex's voice came back, thick with annoyance. She's 1.5 miles out, sir. Barely moving. Looks like she's about to collapse. I've been advising her to quit for the last 20 minutes, stop advising and start observing, Thorne commanded, his voice sharp. What is her physical condition? Is she injured? Negative, sir. Just exhausted. She's out of her league, Thorne didn't believe it. Exhaustion didn't produce biometric readings like this. This was trauma. Something was terribly wrong. He grabbed his keys from his desk. I'm going out there myself, he said into the radio, his voice grim. Do not let her out of your sight. He drove his vehicle out onto the course, kicking up a plume of dust as he sped down the long dirt road. He found her less than 1 mile from the base. The sight of her stopped him in his tracks. She was a specter, caked in dirt and sweat, her face ashen white under a layer of grime. Her eyes were glazed over, fixed on a point far in the distance. And her leg, it was the way she held it. The way her entire body contorted with every step to protect it. It wasn't the limp of a sprain or a pulled muscle. It was the rigid, unnatural movement of someone trying to hold themselves together with sheer force of will. He got out of the vehicle, his heart pounding in his chest with a mixture of horror and profound awe. He had seen soldiers with grievous wounds walk out of battlefields, but this was different. This was a choice. She was choosing this agony, step by agonizing step. As he got closer, he could hear her breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. He saw the dried blood on her lip. He saw the truth. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, what was wrong. And he knew he was witnessing a display of courage that would redefine the very meaning of the word for him forever. Thorne stood in her path, blocking her way. Elara's glazed eyes slowly focused on him, but there was no recognition, only a kind of primal instinct to keep moving. She tried to step around him. It's over, Recruit, Thorne said, his voice gentle but firm. You need to stop. From the fog of her pain, she heard the word stop, and her training kicked in. A test. It was another test. They were trying to make her quit at the finish line. No, sir, she rasped, her voice a dry crackle. I can finish, sir. I have to finish. She tried to push past him, her body swaying precariously. He put a hand on her shoulder to steady her, and he could feel the tremors running through her entire frame. Elara, he said, using her name, trying to break through the haze. You finished hours ago. You finished back on that slide. His words seemed to confuse her. She just shook her head, a stubborn, barely perceptible motion. Have to finish, she repeated, the words a mantra. Just then, Sergeant Rex's jeep pulled up behind them. He got out, his face a mask of impatience. Sir, I told you she was just being stubborn. Thorne turned on him, his eyes blazing with a cold fury Rex had never seen before. Stubborn. Get the medics. Now Rex hesitated, confused. Thorne took a step toward him. I said now, Sergeant. That is a direct order. The sheer force in his commander's voice sent Rex scrambling for his radio. Thorn turned back to Alara, who was now leaning heavily against him, her consciousness fading. "The medics are coming, Alara. Just hold on." As the medical team arrived, their sirens wailing in the distance, a small crowd of the recruits who had already finished began to gather, drawn by the commotion. They saw Alara, propped up against the commander, and they saw the furious, protective look on his face. The medics were efficient. They laid her gently on the ground, and one of them took a pair of shears to her pant leg. As the fabric was cut away, a collective gasp went through the crowd. Her lower leg was grotesquely swollen, a canvas of deep purple and angry red bruising. The bone was clearly displaced, the sharp angle of the fracture visible even to the untrained eye. It was a clean break of both the tibia and fibula. The medics worked quickly, immobilizing the leg in an air splint. A silence fell over the group. The recruits, the ones who had laughed at her, stared at the mangled leg, and then at her pale, unconscious face. The math was simple and horrifying. She had run, climbed, and crawled for more than 10 miles on that leg. Sergeant Rex stood frozen, his face ashen. The smirk, the condescension, the certainty, it all crumbled to dust, leaving behind a raw, gaping shame. He looked from her broken leg to Commander Thorn's face, and for the first time, he understood. He hadn't been testing her strength. He had been blind to it. The hospital room was quiet, its sterile white walls a stark contrast to the grit and chaos of the training facility. Alara woke to the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and a dull, throbbing ache in her leg, which was now encased in a heavy cast. The first thing she saw was Commander Thorn, sitting in a chair by her bed, his hat in his hands. He looked older, more tired than she had ever seen him. When he saw her eyes open, a look of profound relief washed over his face. "Welcome back, recruit," he said softly. She tried to sit up, a wave of disappointment washing over her. "I didn't finish," Sir Thorn shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. "You're wrong. You finished. What you did out there. I've been in this business for 30 years, Alara. I've seen men perform incredible feats of strength and bravery. But I have never seen anything like that. Ever." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "We spend our time here trying to teach recruits how to be strong. We put them through hell to see if they'll break. You came to us already knowing something we've forgotten how to teach. True strength isn't about the weight you can lift or the wall you can climb. It's not about never falling. It's about what you do when you are broken. It's the will to take one more step when every fiber of your being is screaming at you to stop." He stood up and walked to the window. "A spot will be waiting for you in the next class, as soon as you're cleared by the doctors. That's not a favor. It's a necessity. We need you here. I need people like you." Later that week, Thorn summoned Sergeant Rex to his office. Rex entered looking like a man expecting a firing squad. He stood at attention, his eyes fixed on the wall behind Thorn's head. Thorn didn't shout. His voice was quiet, measured, and more devastating than any reprimand. "You saw a small woman, Rex. You saw a weakness in the chain. You saw a standard being lowered. I saw that, too, at first. But I was willing to be wrong. You weren't." He gestured to a chair. "Sit down." Rex sat, stiffly. "You test for muscle," Thorn continued. "You test for aggression. You test for the body. And those things are important. But we've been forgetting to test for the soul. Hers is unbreakable. You designed a course to break her, and instead, she revealed a flaw in your entire philosophy." "In my philosophy," he leaned back in his chair. "Your job is to forge warriors. But you can't forge steel if you throw away the strongest or because you don't like the look of it. From now on, you will look for heart. You will look for will. You will look for the recruit who gets back up after they fall, not the one who never stumbles. You will learn the difference between a body that fails and a spirit that refuses to." Rex finally met his commander's gaze. There was no defiance left in him, only a deep, humbling remorse. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will." The story of Alara's run became a legend at the facility. New recruits would hear about the small woman who finished the serpent's tooth with a broken leg. They started calling the breaker wall Alara's ascent, a reminder that the first obstacle is often a judgment, either from others or from within. Sergeant Rex became a different kind of instructor. He was still hard, still demanding, but his eyes now searched for something deeper than muscle. He looked for the flicker of defiance in the face of failure, for the quiet resolve that burned brighter than any bravado. He looked for the next Alara. And when she returned 6 months later, her leg fully healed, a new light in her eyes, he was the first to welcome her back. Not with a taunt but with a simple, respectful nod. He knew, as they all now knew, that the strongest person on that base was not the one who could lift the most weight, but the one who had learned how to carry the weight of being broken and still find a way to stand. So let me ask you again. What is true strength? It is not the absence of weakness, the immunity to pain, or a life without failure. It is the fierce, beautiful, and often quiet decision to keep going when everything tells you to stop. It is the courage to face your own breaking points and find that what is broken can often be forged into something even stronger. The next time you see someone stumble, the next time you are tempted to judge or to laugh, pause for a moment. Watch closely. You might just be witnessing the most important step of a hero's journey. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that our deepest scars often forge our greatest strengths. Remind them, and remind yourself, that the human spirit is the most resilient force on earth.